The Mountain Trial. As a member of the Applied and Practical Spiritual Ecology group, New Way, Agustin had to face several trials when he went alone to a wild, lonely, and rugged natural place in search of the answers he needed to make a decision that would be decisive in his life and in that of those who depended on him. Recapitulation. It was still dark when I left my small apartment in Guadalajara City and set my course to Chapala Lake. In the day that all members of our group New Way elected to try to perform a personal recapitulation. In our last meeting, we approved this idea unanimously. It was required of us to go individually to a totally isolated and natural place to search for light and inspiration in our lives. I drove almost an hour in the darkness that precedes the break of dawn, and the sudden appearance of the first rays of the morning sun, announcing the coming of a new day, constituted a refreshing surprise. It was a significant coincidence because it happened precisely when I noted the sign of the deviation I had to take to access the connecting road to the town of San Luis Soyatlan. I smiled in satisfaction because the spirit of the lake was confirming that the place I chose for my personal introspection was the right one for the spiritual task I needed to attempt. I parked my car in a secondary street of the town. A little nervous, I rushed my way walking up through one of the streets, looking for the path that will take me towards the enormous mountain that was rising behind the town, which was the tallest of the mountain range that surrounds Lake Chapala, dominating from its top the shores of the sacred lake. I vaguely remembered that one of these streets gave way up directly to the mountain path and to its ascension. Even when I had no intention to climb this mountain completely, I decided to start my climbing through this route and then to search up in the mountainous chain for a place that could be appropriate for introspection and silence. An unexpected guide. After not finding a soul in the path for at least an hour, a strong breeze suddenly blew around me. Still walking, and with a glimpse of the eye, I noted I was being passed at great speed through my right-hand side by an old farmer that should be at least 70 years old. Once recovered of the big surprise, I continued my ascension immediately, asking myself why I could not hear the stranger while he approached me from behind in that steep and lonely trail. At that same instant, the old man turned his head where I was, looking at me with certain indifference for some brief moments, and then continued his way up undisturbed. I could not avoid a smile to see the natural and almost effortless way in which the energetic old man that preceded me walked up the hill with only a pair of rustic sandals called huaraches. A sudden insight helped me to conclude that this encounter wasn't random, but instead a significant one, and could be very well help me with my appointment with the mountains of the sacred lake. I rushed my pace to avoid losing the old man from my sight. The place of power. I caught myself yelling at the farmer in front of me, "Sir, don't go! Wait! Sir, wait!" As the only answer, I only heard the echo of my own voice in the distance, bouncing off some crests that emerged directly in front of me and almost a kilometer from where I was. On those rocks, a whirlwind whipped a small place in the thick vegetation. Even though I ran to where the old man was supposed to be walking, now there was no trace of him, and he had completely disappeared. It was then that several certainties materially fell on me, producing an intense chill that crossed my spine from head to toe. First, I realized for the first time where I was and how high I had climbed the imposing Cerro de Garcia. Second, I understood that my intuition of the importance of the mysterious old man's unexpected closeness was correct, because his sudden appearance was in no way a fortuitous event. Then I came to the conclusion that the rocky place that I suddenly saw should not be very far from where I was, and that it was important to me because it was precisely at this point on the road that the old man disappeared from my vision. Finally, it immediately came to my mind that the place of power designated for me by the Spirit could not be other than the small place on a cliff where the whirlwind was lashing for a few moments. The morning sun was very close to the zenith now, and without wasting an instant, I decided to go immediately to the huge rocky wall that was almost in a straight line from where I was. A sudden scare. Once I set my way to the rocky boulder, I had to surpass a spiky wired fence that was standing on my way towards a small plain that led to my destiny. I decided not to pass it over, but to crawl instead underneath as if wanting to give testimony of my respect for the place I was accessing. Just when I was passing underneath in a horizontal position in the bare ground, I could see with a glimpse of the eye a scorpion that was walking centimeters away from my head without minding my presence at all. Once recovered from the scare, I remained some instants in the same position, considering the event as a good omen, and then I kissed the ground and rose up slowly. As I continued walking, and maybe due to my nervousness and the uncertainty of not really knowing where I was going, it appeared to me I entered more into a profound canyon than to a simple ravine, and before long I stopped recognizing completely my surroundings. After endless times of opening my way through the thick bushes, my surroundings started to clear little by little until I noticed here and there the presence of trees of various sizes that appeared to be very old and standing in peculiar postures, as if showing with their low branches the right direction to follow. 4 hours had passed already since I started in the town of San Luis Oyatlan my ascent to the Cerro de Garcia. The cloddy wall. All of a sudden, I left behind the thick area of bushes and low branches to almost crash frontally with an enormous cloudy wall that stopped cold my vigorous walking. There wasn't any visible route to go up, and after looking over to my right and to my left from one extreme to the other of this peculiar cloudy formation, I could verify that both sides went down to the ravine from which, with so many efforts, I just managed to escape. I even tried for a couple of times to climb it frontally, only to fall down easily because any cleavage I used to push me up crumbled easily. And just in that moment, I heard a sonorous hammering just above from where I was. The strange sound appeared to emanate from an undetermined spot of the enormous semi-rocky wall I had in front of me. Slowly, I rose up, moved by an intense curiosity. Who, I wondered, could be at this height, in this barren and isolated spot of the mountain, working with a hammer? However, the constant and intense hammering continued at intervals. A very imprudent idea, maybe the result of the long journey, came abruptly to my mind: to jump from the top of the rocky formation towards the stump of a little tree spring that was in the wall and grab it, pushing my body upward to access the climbing route that appeared to be feasible once above the little but resistant tree spring. I decided to climb up to the top of the steep rocky formation to take a closer look at the nature of the problem that would imply to do such a temerity. When I rose up from the rock, I felt my whole body as a sparking torch, and without thinking for an instant, I launched myself into the tree, catapulted by an authentic vortex of energy. And in a few seconds, I found myself firmly enrolled and victorious over the strong stump and now in the cloudy wall. Surprised by my heroic feat, I shouted a spectacular and vigorous victory scream. In my best fashion, and gathering all my remaining energy, I carefully rose up and sat back the best I could in the little terrace where the providential tree stood up. Stuck in the middle. It became very clear to me that the rock of the cloudy wall could not sustain me anymore in my way up, because every time I tried, the rock would crumble and I would go down to the terrace where I was. Then it became clear as well that I had to find another way to go up, because in my current situation there was no possibility to return or to go back in my path. To even think to jump back to the place where I was not feasible. If I didn't advance at all, I would surely die of starvation. A sudden strong wind came at that moment to whip the terrace where I was, and it was so strong that forced me to close my eyes and grab the stump of the tree where I was. A little after, its intensity stopped completely in the same surprising way that it started. When I opened my eyes again, I received a huge surprise when I discovered just in front of me, following the direction of the stump that went inside that wall, a crevice of singular size in the same area. The strong wind uncovered it from the dry branches and moss that were covering it before. It even appeared to have enough space for a person to crawl inside the fissure. Knowing that I had nothing to lose, I took off my backpack and changed my clothes and remained dressed only with shorts, a t-shirt and sneakers to have more chances to advance without difficulties into the crevasse. After advancing, crawling for a couple of meters, I noted the crevasse was widening and going down a little more, which made my advance easier. But after 4 or 5 more meters, I finally understood that the crevasse wasn't going upstairs. I noted I was not going down anymore in my advance, and this helped me to calm down my new agitation of being in a dark and tidy, rocky abode, and clearly knowing that at this point, again, I had nothing to lose anymore because I couldn't continue up. I couldn't continue going to where I was on the way going back because I was crawling. So after another endless 7 meters advancing, and when I took my right hand to my face to clean a mixture of sweat and dust over my eyelashes that was bothering me to no end, I involuntarily shouted when I discovered my own hand among the raining darkness. There was light. With a frantic fervor, I crawled vigorously ahead while noticing every time with more clarity the surroundings of the tunnel I was in, which appeared to widen up a little upward. With lots of effort, I kept crawling 2 or 3 more meters in direction of the luminosity that descended from above until I could see with all clarity a narrow chimney that ascended 10 or 12 meters to what it appeared to be the top of the cloudy wall. With the very last of the strength I had left, I performed a titanic impulse upwards the rocky chimney, and the route that I chose to sustain my efforts of pulling myself upwards exceeded all my expectations of resistance, and little by little I kept raising myself up until I finally emerged from my underground odyssey with a last and vigorous impulse that allowed my head to rise up and above a loose hummock that uncovered the profound concavity in which I was. A secure abode. To receive in my bare face fully the warm light of the sun that I truly doubted to see again was a whole mystical and unforgettable experience after an endless stay in the deepness of the cloudy wall, as well as to breathe again the pure air that was flowing generous in my place of power. With the last reserve of my fading energy, I stood up and gyrated ecstatic around the place to recognize it and give it my salutations. My whole body was trembling, and I considered prudent to go and sit at the shadow of a nearby tree. And that was my last thought, because immediately after, my exhaustion won the battle. When I recovered my conscience again, I noticed there was an absolute silence in the place. When I turned for the first time to the north, the impacting beauty of the sacred lake left me speechless. My place of power was peculiar because it formed an almost perfect circle and was very inaccessible to the sight from the exterior, due to being under a circle of tall pines that covered the interior. I decided then to place myself at the very center of the circle that constituted my place of power and initiate a ritual to give thanks and ask for help and protection. I was experiencing an increased pleasant sensation of warmth in my heart and the strange sensation of being at the center of an enormous scenario in which a multitude of spectators observed me. In one of my walking evolutions around the place, I felt an enormous reflux of heat escaping materially from my heart and stopped immediately. I sat instinctively in that place and felt that the ground and grass below was burning in that spot. The burning temperature stabilized as a pleasant sensation of external as well as an internal warmth that in some way augmented considerably my hearing capacity. Another strange sensation that was consolidating little by little in my perception was the total absence of the free flow of thoughts. After a few instants, all my being was fully functioning either as a pure intuition or as an auditory perceiver. At the same time, to each emanation of warmth, I felt coming out of my heart the pain of my battered and bruised back, legs, arms, and articulations diminished sensibly. The messages. A little afterwards, a well-known sound took me again by surprise. The constant hammering that somehow guided me towards the place of power started again. Moved by an insatiable curiosity and thinking it was a person, I tried to stand up from where I seated, but I could not really move because my body was very numb by the rigors of my journey. I concluded that in part my immobility was because there were messages I should receive, and determined to wait for those messages, I accommodated myself as comfortable as I could. Suddenly, I saw a shadow moving fleetingly between two pines, and turning my head I saw it. The mysterious hammering that initially I thought was coming from a person actually was an enormous woodpecker working hardly in the stump of one of the highest pines. And before turning back my head, I mentally sent him my sincere thanks from the bottom of my heart for its important participation in my search for the place of power the Great Spirit had designated for me. It was probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then something happened that I have not been able to explain to this day. At my back, and only centimeters away from where I was sitting, I clearly heard and felt the air above my head and the vibrations in my body produced by a vigorous flapping from what I think was a winged being of an enormous size. My guardian angel, maybe? But all these are my own speculations because I didn't attempt to turn my head to look back, considering it improper to do so. I knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that between the sacred spirit that inhabit this region and myself dwells a close relationship that surely goes back through several incarnations. I understood then that everything had concluded. Now I had to go back because I knew, thanks to my experience as a mountaineer, that when we have access to a sacred place or to the top of a mountain, one has to stay there only the time that is strictly necessary as a gesture of respect for its sacredness. Otherwise, the mountain can make a claim for the climber and retain him or her forever. The riddle. The only problem consisted on the fact that, in spite of having my energy restored considerably by the place of power, my body was very numb by the continuous effort of more than 7 hours of engagement with the mountain. In addition, I still had to find a proper route to return that could allow me to go down from the sacred terrace I was in the best possible conditions. Fortunately, the mountain gave me a double intuition in the form of a solution to my immediate problems, because I was given to briefly visualize 2 events of my past. The first, and a very recent one, showed my friend the woodpecker working hard in its preferred pine tree, and the second showed a scene of my past in which I saw myself giving as a gift a Catholic rosary to a young master and warrior that belonged to the Mexican tradition and ethnic culture of the Seri or Kunkaak, or those who live in the sand, and that inhabit Isla Tiburon in the Mexican Pacific Ocean. In the first visualization, the riddle was an easy one, and I concluded that since the woodpecker had guided me to find my place of power, I was certain it would also guide me in my search for a safe way to go down the terrace. The second visualization was a more difficult one to solve because I could not understand the hidden message in my giving a prayer item such as a rosary as a gift to a young master of Isla Tiburon. However, it was clear to me that the second problem to solve was my physical incapacity and my numbness. And our conversation came then to me in all clarity, because in that occasion the master of Isla Tiburon told me, we can all extract energy from Mother Nature. With a pure heart, look at the horizon and extend your hands towards the sun, the clouds, the mountains, the rivers and the valleys. They are alive and are our brothers and like to give gifts to those who deserve it. And then he kept silent. I thought then to have solved the riddle presented in the second visualization, to use the wisdom and advices expressed by my brother of Isla Tiburon to restore my physical body at least at the minimum level required to function efficiently on the path of return. In addition, I thought one more thing. For some powerful reason, the rosary has been also present in the intuition received. Then, logically, it should also have an important role in whichever I tried to achieve. Without any hesitation, I raised my arms to heaven, and with my arms extended, I started praying Hail Marys to our Mother Mary of Guadalupe, aspiring profoundly the pure air that surrounded me during the first segment of the prayer and exhaling profoundly during the second and last part of every prayer. Without knowing how or when, I discovered myself now standing completely straight in the same spot where minutes before I was seated and numb. Deeply moved, I said goodbye to the sacred place, thanking from the bottom of my heart the place, the mountain, its guardians, and the Lake Chapala for the consideration they showed for my humble self, and then walked without hesitation to the exact pine tree where I last saw the enormous woodpecker. Once I transcended the circular barrier of pine trees that enclosed the place of power, it became evident this was in a narrow terrace at the top of a very inaccessible ridge, and I was extremely surprised to have been able to get to where I was. A particular area grabbed my attention powerfully because it seemed to be a wide cleavage in the ridge, maybe even a recent fracture caused by some small avalanche due to the obvious instability of the material of the cloudy wall. It appeared to be the perfect place to try to go down because it had at most 60 degrees of inclination, and from where I was looking it appeared to continue down until the very bottom of the wall. I couldn't help but smiling before the paradox that was presented to my eyes. The only visible weakness of that inaccessible wall, through which it would be totally impossible to climb up, would now be my route of escape down towards the security of a solid and stable ground. I initiated my descent, sliding myself down little by little with extreme caution through that place. After stopping in several occasions because I precipitated over myself small avalanches of loose rocks, I managed in 20 minutes to complete my descent to solid ground. The farewell. After more than 8 hours in the mountain, I was contemplating for the first time the factual possibility of a safe return. However, the area where I made my descent was totally unknown to me, and it appeared to be very strange. So I appealed to the sun again to guide my return. It was close to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so I decided to rush my walking directly in my descent in a straight line, trusting to find eventually the rustic trail that accompanied me during a great part of my ascent. It would be chilling and cold shortly, as soon as the sun completed its descent behind the mountains of the east, and this will surely mean the danger of cramps in my battered articulations and a descent of the temperature in my aching body. Besides, according to my estimations, once I could find the rustic trail again, I was facing at least 2 hours of descent at a good pace to reach the town of San Luis Soyatlan, just with the amount of daylight time remaining in my memorable journey. After 30 anguished minutes of walking towards the sun in a flat area with thick bushes on both sides, which I could not materially see where I was going, a ray of hope crossed my mind when I saw a spiky wire fence not far away from where I was. Without hesitation, I crossed the spiky wire fence and continued walking in a straight line to what appeared to be the rustic trail that should take me down the mountain. My assumptions were right, and pretty soon I was walking down the rustic trail that would lead me back to the town of San Luis Soyatlan and to my car. I was very tired, but completely satisfied. The mountain had showed me its power, and I, in my smallness, and maybe due to the wisdom we all have in our hearts, was able to surpass the challenges and tests which with it confronted me. I had grown spiritually thanks to the kindness of a great number of beings that assisted me with unconditional love in my journey. I, of course, never walked alone. In that battle were present my spiritual brother, the sacred spirit that inhabits the sacred lake, Chapala Lake, my brothers and sisters of New Way, who I know were praying for me, my dear Paloma, my place of power, the sacred elements, its flora, its fauna, and its guardians, the wise advices of my dear grandfather of the North, and my brother and young Master Seti, the energy of our dear friend and American Master. The example and advices of our spiritual guide and the great kindness and powerful protection of our Mother Mary of Guadalupe, all spiritual sons and daughters of our great Father. To all of them I gave my sincere appreciation in great voices in that pleasant and lukewarm evening while walking down on that dusty and dry trail that seemed to me like the most beautiful of carpets. Little by little, an indescribable peace was taken over me. And when I finished thanking those great brothers and sisters, a great fall of tears of happy and intense joy precipitated down my cheeks. It was a loving embrace, pure, plentiful, and beautiful between my soul, the spirit that animated that sacred place, and all the beautiful spirits that fought that battle with me, on my side and back to back, and heart with heart. A multicolor explosion of blues, reds, and oranges walked with me during the setting of the sun for the rest of the trail, as a last gift during that memorable journey.